tuning in to Human Powered. This is Jessica Becker, and I'm here with my co-host, Jen Rubin. And we are talking today to Brendon Panke. We're pretty excited to share some information about what he's up to in the storytelling community. Brendon, welcome.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to get a chance to talk to you, Brendon, along with Jessica. You know, Brendon and I, we do a lot of storytelling stuff together in my life outside of Wisconsin Humanities and Love Wisconsin. But I know you've been part of the storytelling work we've been doing inside state prisons. And I know you think a lot about storytelling and have taken it in all kinds of directions. So I'm excited that we get to talk to you with Jessica.
Yeah, it's always nice to talk to you, Jen.
So I'm thinking before we get into like some of the other stuff you do, maybe Jessica, I think we should just I'm just going to dive into the Odyssey Behind Bar project and the storytelling Brendon and I do. So Brendon and I have been doing storytelling workshops with the Odyssey Project, which is a I refer to it as just like a very high-end, rigorous humanities class that the UW-Madison offers for folks who've had significant barriers to education. So Brendon and I have this sort of three-part storytelling workshop that we've done there. And so I think what was in 2020, we brought that work into state prisons. And so Brendon, you've been really kind of integrally involved with that, right? And so one of the things you're doing with this podcast is talking about well, what are the public humanities? And, when the federal government defunds this work on a state level, what is being lost or what is potentially being lost. So I'd love to hear you just sort of talk about this work you've been doing inside state prisons and how you think about it.
Yeah. I think about it as my favorite classrooms. I mean, when we come into the classrooms, they've already been going for several weeks. So I know that when I step into that classroom, it's going to be a learning community. There'll be a lot of trust between the people in the classes. And they'll already have worked up to being real vulnerable with each other, so that by the time I'm there and asking them to tell another story, they're ready for it.
We jumped right into this conversation about stories because obviously that is the way that you and Jen know each other. But I wonder if we could just take a step back and why stories? Is there something you remember from your own childhood, or what got you interested in stories? Is there a story you even remember from being a kid? The first story you heard, the first story you were told that sticks with you?
I have a real talkative and noisy, big Catholic, Irish Catholic family on my mom's side. And so a lot of uncles, and a lot of them actually were bad at telling stories, but they would not stop. So you had to be better and louder to take up space in the room so that they would be quiet and listen for a little while. That's part of it. And then I just remember it was almost like a flex, how long can you draw out a story? How long can you string people along? Kind of like these elaborate dad joke kind of things where you have a really long setup for a very small payoff. And it's a particular thing. But the way I came into doing it on stage is I had improvised in undergrad, and then I came to Madison for grad school. And there was a company that had just started an improv company called Atlas Improv. And so I auditioned, didn't get in, and then later got picked up in their audition class and ended up accidentally owning the whole company for a few years. And then after that, I would go to the open mics, stand up at the Comedy Club on State, which is a really great community, really great for really pushing people to do their best work, but it wasn't the right form for me. And then there was a group of grad students that I kind of fell in with that were creating a storytelling event called Madison Storytellers. It started out as house parties at co-ops and stuff. And then we started getting more and more interest in storytelling, especially these story slams where you don't know who's going to get up. At the Moth, you don't know whose name's going to get pulled, and a community starts to form around this. of really being excited and connecting with the story. Like stories are told for connection. So it's really common for somebody to leave the stage and then people come up to you and they're like, oh, this story I really connected to it this way, or I remember this thing from when I was a kid, just like that, or my mom was just like that, and it's really an open invitation for those kinds of conversations.
I love how you just brought up the words connecting and how stories are an invitation. And I wonder, you've obviously thought at this point now about the power of story. And what is it that you think is different in what makes a story so powerful as a connective tool?
Um, I think the thing about story, even story as like a performance, is that you're opening yourself up. I love when somebody gets up on stage and they're like revealing a little bit about themselves, the weird things about themselves. Those are always the stories I really gravitate towards and are really spark connection. I think. Rather than like maybe the best put together story or the most polished story. If somebody comes up there and they've got like all these little flourishes, and I just kind of get tired of it. I've seen all those things before, but if somebody gets up there and just really puts it on the line, if they're willing to, yeah, take a risk and share something, I think that's what really gets me.
Yeah, and I think at the heart of good storytelling, is to repeat the word you both use is connection. And I think, I don't know, Brendon, if you want to get like a little like, storytelling 101 here with it, but this idea of like how do you take a moment, how do you take a memory, how do you take an anecdote, that we all have and we all want to tell them, but how do you tell it in a way that people connect with it, right? And that's like the craft of it, right? Trying to figure out like what's the beating emotional heart behind that thing, and I think to the point of when people pull out, like leave aside the flourishes, and there's a lot of safety behind those flourishes, but just really get to the heart of the story. Like that's where we all really, connect with it and want to talk about it. Storytelling is a word all kinds of people use, right? Like, oh, storytelling this, storytelling that. But if I think about it as like a public humanities tool, a way to sort of bring people together, that's what it is. Because like the only way I think you're going to see a connection between someone whose life is quite different than your own is if you see a similar emotion in the story. I've heard Brendon work on the story over 10 years now, right? He has this story, like a really impactful thing that happened to you as a kid, right? And having you find the meaning in it over time, because of course our
Mhm.
lives change over time, so the meaning changes. So I don't know, it might be fun for you to kind of talk us through that a little bit.
Sure, sure, yeah. So the story Jen is talking about is the when I got shot in the eye with a BB gun when I was a Boy Scout. And I was not just a Boy Scout, but I was a counselor. And you know, I'm okay. I can see out of both eyes still. But I was thinking about that story and oh, that should be interesting to tell people, right? Because they'd always been warned about it, but whoever had it happen to them or a friend. Um, actually, Jen, I was just telling that story in front of Scott for the Odyssey Beyond Wars class. And he's like, oh, that happened to me too. And so, like, that's the first time in all the years I've been telling it where somebody's like, yeah, this also happened to me. Um, but it's a really good anecdote. It's an interesting anecdote. But then when I got to the end of it, people would be like, "Okay, well, what happened?" And I'd have to say, "Well, I'm okay." And the story, so something happened, but it wasn't really about anything. And I told it that way for years and years, probably for over a decade. And then one day I was preparing it again, for a storytelling event and I decided to try it out and see if I could figure this story out. And so I widened the lens a little bit about like the time in my life I was looking at, and I realized that in that time, um, I'd also, was trying to figure out my relationship with my mom. My dad had died recently, relatively recently, and um, I was just trying to figure that out. And so I ran away to Boy Scout camp which was like 30 minutes from my house. And we had all these low-key arguments about it over the summer. But then when I got shot in the eye and I had both eyes wrapped up, so I was blind for a few hours, and I ended up in the hospital, and it was in Burlington, and it's not a great hospital, and you're not supposed to go there. And I was sitting there all alone, and suddenly the door opens, and I knew it was my mom. And the first thing she says is like, "Oh, you really wanted to be a pirate that bad, huh?" And so I knew if my mom was making fun of me that I was going to be okay, right? And so the uh not everybody's been shot in the eye, but everybody has had like a mom, somebody to take care of them. And so that's a relationship that people can really connect with, and a part of the story people can connect with.
I'm glad you brought up the idea that storytelling is sort of this public humanities tool, Jen, because I was going to mention that for me, I'm not coming from the storytelling community that you're mentioning, getting up on stage, never done that. I don't think of myself as a storyteller in this same way. And so just for anybody listening that maybe, storytelling, that word is used all the time to tell a story. But what we're talking about here is something that not only seems to bring people together, the community of listeners, but it sounds like you're also really learning a lot about yourself. So ultimately, this is the humanities at work, both for the storyteller and the people who get to hear these stories. And I think that this word humanities is very hard to hard to pick apart, strangely, because it actually has the word human in it, and storytelling is one
Mm.
of those things that anthropologists say makes us human, right? Our ability to reflect on something that's happened to us, think backward and think forward. And so um, I think that's maybe what you're describing, but I don't know if you want to say any more about why you've really um, taken the time to tell a story for 10 years. what
Yeah.
what makes you want to keep telling this same story and to people, in front of people?
Hmm. I mean, it's really you're right. So there is another thing that Jen and I say in our classes is, right, the story really, why people come to the story to listen to you, why people listen to you is they're looking for that change that you're maybe describing, something where something within you changed, something for you changed. But I think there's also some of that in storytelling. There's also times that I've told stories to re-examine something in my own life. Stories and how we frame them can change things for us, for me, that definitely.
Well, one thing I also
Yeah.
think,
Oh, sorry.
what your question had me think of, Jessica, is like and I feel this everywhere I do storytelling workshops, but I certainly feel this way inside prisons. I don't know if you feel the same way, Brendan, is like what like not everyone needs to or has an interest in telling a story out on stage in front of people, right? But like people like being given these tools, right? Which again are sort of like these public humanities tools, being given these tools on like how to tell the story about yourself exactly as you want to tell it is so meaningful for people. And I even sort of moved to this place of even if people don't receive it how you want to receive it, the fact that you are changed in that process is like the most important thing. And we see it happen over and over again. And I know, Brendan, you are now doing, I don't know the right term from it, but like medical narrative telling or something. And
Hmm.
is that sort of how that works? Is that sort of what that's about? Like the people,
Yeah. So I got a certificate in narrative medicine. And really, I got it because, I'd been doing this story stuff for a long time, but it was hard to put it on a resume because there's no piece of paper attached to it. So I heard about it and I was like, oh, this'll be my way in to this. But then I got into the work, um, which is, I mean, narrative medicine was was created because they're like, oh, medical training makes doctors more callous and harsh. I was like, oh, how can we fix that? The humanities, like that's how we teach people to connect. And so it's explicitly that. But I think it's there's a lot more applications. And now I know that my my storytelling work has gotten that much better because of this training that I received. And a lot of times there's like a great doctor at UW Health, Toby Campbell, who does palliative care, and he uses a lot of narrative in his and narrative medicine. And so we've connected to talk about his work and my work and start thinking of potentially ways we could do something together. So he actually teaches a class to residents where when they're talking about like, hey, if we do the surgery correctly, there'll be a 50% chance that this will happen and a 5% chance that this really bad thing will happen. And really those numbers don't mean anything to us. So he teaches them to actually tell a story. So, like, oh, tell a story about the best outcome possible. What would that person's life look like in that case? Now, tell them that story if the worst, that 5% chance happened. What would their life look like? And once the person hears it as a narrative rather than just a number, their decision making is much more anchored in information that they can actually use in their lives, that they can picture affecting them.
I think the basic concept of one's life as a story is actually kind of radical and revolutionary if you haven't thought of it yet, that you are creating your own story, you're living a story, you are a story. And yeah, that to me feels pretty radical. And it must also kind of wake people up to start to tell their own story, as Jen said, in their own words, how they want to shape it. That's empowering, right?
Yeah, I sometimes describe it as like, hey, your life is what happened to you, and the story is what it means to you. So there's all these events, they happened in a certain order, and you lived through them in a certain order. But then you can take different parts of that and put them together in different ways to make meaning. So maybe these events didn't touch in time, they weren't right next to each other, but in a story you can put them together and get meaning from that. And affect how those things land for you and affect you.
Right, and that's sort of bringing in like the reflective part of your brain. Like we can reflect back on these experiences and see how they connect. We can bring a critical thinking to our own lives.
Yeah, and I think, one of the places where this medical work and training really overlapped for me with um, the storytelling we do in prisons or I do with veterans um, is that there is in the medical humanities, medical sociology, there's an idea of like you tell a story when an interruption happens in your life, like in the story that's happened to you. And man, there's not many bigger interruptions than prison. And not that every story has to be around like actually, let's talk about something else that besides the reason you're incarcerated, unless you want to. But thinking, I love that idea. It's really changed how I think about all stories, whether good or bad, that there's some kind of interruption in the flow of what was going on for you. And you want to mark that and you want to describe it to other people.
And we know that people connect through stories, and that's one of the ways that we can sort of break down barriers, not just in the room as you're describing a storytelling event, but also hearing personal stories. We had an exhibit that we traveled a while ago. Wisconsin Humanities worked with the Centro Hispano and traveled an exhibit about called Immigrant Journeys, about people who are living in Wisconsin who have immigrated here from other places, specifically Latin American countries. And it was really an opportunity to introduce folks around the state to people through their story,
Mhm.
because we know that that is it's through those relationships, whether they're sort of personal or hearing a person's story, that we kind of start to empathize and get to know each other in a different way. So even if it's not just at a storytelling event, but there's larger implications for the power of story.
You can't have any imagination without storytelling and really in any of those, in any instance where you want there to be a different world or a different reality, like you have to figure out what that is first, and being able to tell the story of what you see coming for everyone is really important. It's how we decide where we're going.
Yeah, and I think the things about those spaces and even being in a storytelling event of some kind or what you were describing, Jessica, with the immigrant journeys, like people have to decide to enter those spaces, right? Like, I mean, that's the thing. Like they have to decide I am open to hearing what other people have to say, right? And I think once like that's like half the battle. Then once you're open, then you can hear it, and then it's really pretty amazing to see all the ways that we have similarities, to see all the ways that we're different, but that's interesting, but like someone has to be willing to put themselves in that space. That's one of the things we are losing when we lose this funding, right? Like we have had so many interesting community-based projects that brought people together across difference through a shared art or through music or through something, right? And so there is such a value to that, and it is such a loss to that. And I know there are still plenty, no, plenty of people are still doing this work. And I think we should, the more we learn about it, the more we amplify it, the better,
Mhm.
right? Because, you know, it all matters for the health of our communities.
I think also though, one of the things that happens is when you have something like that, right? You might draw somebody to, usually an event draws people together because of perceived similarities. But storytelling is the way that you display all the differences that are really interesting, and that's what I'm there for, like in all those events, not to hear where our lives overlapped, but to hear where they are different as well, and learn from those things being put side by side.
I agree. I mean, as someone who's been in lots of storytelling spaces, like, you're going to hear 10 stories. The last thing you want are 10 similar stories, right? Like just the weirder and more different you can get across the night is what the audience wants, even if they didn't know it coming in, but like, they're psyched.
Mm,
Whoa, that was a range.
Storytelling is this sort of natural human inclination, this way that we can make meaning out of our lives and our experiences. What we lose when we lose public spaces where people gather naturally is we lose getting that chance to hear people's story. But also just to point out that, one of the problems is this loss of kind of public space and regular gathering and the loneliness
mhm,
that we have as a culture. And storytelling does naturally happen when people come together, especially across generations and in relaxed, casual, sort of comfortable spaces. It's nice to know that naturally humans do start to share their stories, and that's one of the ways we make meaning of our own lives and kind of understand the meaning of everybody's life.
Well, speaking of public spaces, Brendan, you now co-produced the Moss Story Slam in Madison, which is a super lively public space. And there's whether you live in Madison or whatever community you live in, there's probably someone who's organized something to bring people together to tell stories, to do poetry. Maybe it's at a library, maybe it's at a coffee shop, maybe it's at a bar. But I would encourage you to check it out because it's happening most likely somewhere in your town.
yeah, it definitely is happening in your town, especially at libraries. So, and it's happening here in Madison, on the second Monday of every month. So come on out.
All right. Well, thanks for coming to talk to us, Brendan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It was really fun.
Well, that was a great chance to talk to Brendon, who I know you've worked with for a while, on Wisconsin Humanities funded programming in prisons through Odyssey Beyond Bars. And it's really nice to kind of pick apart what makes storytelling as a humanities tool so useful, and to hear from someone who has clearly gone through his own sort of learning about why this matters so much to him personally and why he's so excited to share it in a way that really touches people. So thanks for inviting him, Jen.
Yeah, you know, Brandon and I lead these workshops together all the time. So we sort of like we know each other's stories so well because often use our stories like as teaching tools to folks. Which is why I was excited for him to talk about the BB gun story. But I did like hearing him talk because I haven't really had a chance to ask him much about his narrative storytelling. And I liked how he said that like what best way to help doctors speak to patients in a way that they can understand is through the humanities, right? And so I did appreciate that. Yeah.
Being with the doctor and really softening through that storytelling.
Yeah. I actually saw that firsthand when my mom was, in heart failure for a couple weeks in the hospital, and the palliative care, there was one particular palliative care person who clearly knew how to help my mom think about her story and what she wants, like in a way that when I finished that, I thought, oh my God, if I was younger, I would become a, hospital social worker or something because I was just so impressed and moved by the work that they did. So anyhow, so I was glad to hear more about that. All right. Well, we'll be back, in 2 weeks with another episode.
That's right. Tell your friends, spread the word, subscribe, and share. We're glad to be here with you.
If you want to hear more about the storytelling work that Brendon and I were talking about, we do in prisons on season 2 of Human Powered, where we're looking at the impact of humanities inside Wisconsin prisons. Episode 2, 5 Minutes and a Mic, is about those particular storytelling classes. So check it out.
And I want to give a shout out to Chrissy Widmeyer, who is doing the audio editing and production for this episode and for all of Human Powered this season. So thanks, Chrissy, and thanks for being here.